The judge cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound in the dead silence of the courtroom, and Mark's face was a masterpiece of smug satisfaction. He sat beside his lawyer, radiating a confidence so profound it was almost a physical presence. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car, his hair perfectly coiffed, a faint condescending smirk playing on his lips. He glanced over at me, a look that was meant to be pity but was laced with so much contempt it was practically poison. He thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything. My home, my dignity, my future. He thought he had broken me down to my component parts and left me as dust on the courtroom floor. His sister, Clara, sat a row behind him, a carbon copy of his arrogance, her expression one of triumphant glee. She caught my eye and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a gesture of faux sympathy that was more insulting than any curse. They were a matched set, the two of them. Polished predators in expensive clothing, convinced of their own superiority. The judge adjusted his spectacles, peering down at the sheaf of papers in his hand. The air in the room was thick, heavy with anticipation. Mark's lawyer patted his arm, a gesture of final reassurance. The final nail in my coffin was about to be hammered home. And then the judge spoke. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as he read from the document that sealed my husband's fate. Upon review of the submitted documentation, specifically the irrevocable trust established on August 14, 2008, by one Rose Miller on behalf of her granddaughter. He paused, looking over his glasses directly at me. This court finds that the property located at 125 Willow Creek Lane is, and has always been, the sole and exclusive property of the plaintiff. Mark's smirk didn't just vanish. It was wiped clean from his face, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of utter disbelief. His head swiveled from the judge to his lawyer, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into panic. The judge wasn't finished. He continued, his voice a steady drone of destruction. Furthermore, regarding the business assets of Sterling Innovations, LLC, given the plaintiff's documented contributions and the evidence of financial malfeasance provided, he kept talking, detailing the dissolution of the life Mark had built on a foundation of lies. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the smug facade until there was nothing left but raw, ugly shock. Clara's face had gone white as a sheet, her perfectly painted mouth hanging open, and for the first time in 2 years, as I watched the world my husband had built crumble into ash around him, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, quiet, private thing, but it was the most genuine smile that had touched my lips in a very long time. It was the smile of victory. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That was the end of the story. To understand how we got to that perfect, beautiful moment of destruction, you have to go back to the beginning. I'm sitting here now in my sunroom. The one he always said was a frivolous waste of space. The morning light is streaming in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. A mug of coffee, still hot, is warming my hands. Outside, the garden is in full bloom, a riot of color that I planted myself last spring. It's peaceful, quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full of contentment. An old shoebox sits on the table in front of me. I was cleaning out the attic, a task I'd put off for years, and I found it tucked away in a corner. It's full of old photographs, faded Polaroids, and glossy prints from a time before everything was digital. And there it is, right on top, a picture of me and Mark, taken about 15 years ago. We're standing in the empty lot that would one day become this house. We're young, smiling. He has his arm around me, and I'm leaning into him, my face full of a naive trust that almost makes me want to weep for the girl I was. She had no idea what was coming. She had no idea the man with his arm around her would one day try to destroy her. She had no idea that the very ground they were standing on was a secret she would one day have to keep to save herself. Looking at that photo, it all comes flooding back. The good, the bad, and the brutal, and the plan. The quiet, patient, meticulous plan that brought us to that courtroom. Let me tell you how it all happened. Let me tell you how I got my life back. When I met Mark, I was 24 and just finishing my master's degree in architectural history. I had plans, big ones. I wanted to work in historical preservation, to save old buildings from the wrecking ball, to write books about the stories held within their walls. I was passionate, driven, and saw a clear path ahead of me. Mark was the detour I never saw coming. He was charming, ambitious, and had this incredible energy about him. He was starting a small tech consulting firm, Sterling Innovations, and he talked about his vision with a fire in his eyes that was utterly captivating. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world who truly understood his genius. We fell in love fast and hard. It was a whirlwind of late-night talks, cheap takeout eaten on the floor of his tiny apartment, and sketching out business plans on napkins. He was the visionary. I was the practical one. I helped him write his business plan, designed his first logo, even helped him set up his bookkeeping. My own plans, my own career, started to feel distant, less important than the vibrant, exciting future he was painting for us. "We're a team, babe," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "You and me against the world." And I believed him. I believed every single word. We got married a year later. A simple courthouse ceremony, because every penny we had was going into the business. I took a part-time job at a library to ensure we had a steady, if small, income, while he got Sterling Innovations off the ground. My dreams of architectural preservation were packed away in a box, labeled for later. The first few years were a struggle. There were times we barely made rent. I remember eating ramen for a week straight so we could afford to fly to a potential client meeting. I never complained. I saw it as an investment in our future. I was the supportive wife, the woman behind the man, and I took pride in that role. It felt noble. Slowly, things started to turn around. He landed a big client, then another. The business grew. We moved out of the tiny apartment and into a respectable rental house. Mark started wearing suits instead of jeans. The man who once ate ramen on the floor now talked about quarterly projections and shareholder value. I was happy for him, for us. I was his sounding board, his editor, his unpaid administrative assistant. I managed our home, our social calendar, and his increasingly demanding family, particularly his sister, Clara. Clara had never liked me. From the beginning, she'd viewed me with a cool suspicion, as if I were a gold digger who had somehow failed to find any gold. She was a woman who measured worth in brand names and zip codes. My quiet, academic background was, in her eyes, a sign of a profound lack of ambition. She made her disapproval known in 1,000 tiny ways. The backhanded compliments about my simple taste, the way she'd bring up Mark's ex-girlfriends, who were all apparently daughters of surgeons or CEOs, the way she'd look at my secondhand furniture with a little sneer. "It's just Clara," Mark would say, waving away my concerns. "She's just protective of me." I tried to believe him. I hosted family dinners, remembered her birthday, and complimented her on her latest designer handbag, all in the name of keeping the peace. I played the part of the dutiful sister-in-law, just as I played the part of the supportive wife. It was all part of the job description. About 5 years into our marriage, my grandmother, Nana Rose, passed away. It was a devastating loss. She was my anchor, the one who had raised me after my parents died when I was young. Nana Rose was a force of nature, a no-nonsense woman who had worked as a certified public accountant until she was 75. She was sharp as a tack and had a sixth sense for sniffing out nonsense. She had liked Mark, but she'd never been fully sold on him. "He has a salesman's smile, honey," she'd told me once. "Just make sure you always know what he's selling." In her will, she left me a substantial inheritance. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to change our lives. It was enough to buy a house, a real house, with a yard and a future. Mark was ecstatic. He immediately started talking about building our dream home. He found a perfect plot of land in a prestigious suburb, the kind of place Clara would approve of. He hired architects and designers. He was in his element, managing the project, making grand decisions. It was during this time that I had a conversation with Nana Rose's lawyer, Mr. Fields, a kind elderly man who had managed her affairs for decades. We were finalizing the details of the inheritance transfer. "Your grandmother was a very wise woman," he said, peering at me over his bifocals. "She left some very specific instructions regarding this money." He explained that Nana Rose had stipulated that any primary residence purchased with her inheritance had to be placed into a special kind of irrevocable trust, a trust that would have me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. My name, and my name alone, would be on the deed. "It's an asset protection trust," Mr. Fields explained gently. "It means the house will be yours, and only yours. It can't be touched by creditors. It can't be considered a marital asset in a divorce. It can't be leveraged for a business loan. It is, for all legal purposes, a fortress." I was taken aback. Why would she do that? Mr. Fields gave me a sad, knowing smile. Rose saw a lot in her line of work. She saw smart women left with nothing because they trusted too much. She said to me, "A woman needs her own walls to stand within, walls no man can tear down." This was her final gift to you, not just the money, but the security. I felt a pang of guilt. It felt deceptive. Mark and I were a team. You and me against the world. "What should I tell Mark?" I asked. "Tell him the truth, but not all of it," Mr. Fields advised. "Tell him your grandmother's will required the house to be put in a trust for tax purposes. It's not even a lie. It has significant tax advantages. But you don't need to get into the specifics of its structure. Let him think it's just legal mumbo-jumbo. Most people's eyes glaze over when you mention the word trust." And so that's what I did. I told Mark about the trust requirement. Just as Mr. Fields predicted, his eyes glazed over. "A trust? Okay, whatever the lawyers say, babe," he said, already more interested in the blueprints for the kitchen. "As long as we get our house." He never asked for the paperwork. He never questioned it again. In his mind, it was our house. He was the man of the house, the provider. The legal details were just boring paperwork, women's work. His arrogance was my shield. He simply couldn't conceive of a world where he wasn't in complete control. So we built the house. It was beautiful. A sprawling modern farmhouse with a big kitchen and a beautiful sunroom. I poured my heart into it. While Mark was busy growing his business, which was now incredibly successful, I was the one meeting with contractors, picking out tiles, choosing paint colors. I made that house a home. We lived in that home for 10 years. 10 years of dinner parties, holidays, and quiet evenings. 10 years where Sterling Innovations grew into a multi-million-dollar company. Mark became a big deal in the local tech scene. He was featured in magazines. He gave talks at conferences. And I became an accessory. My role was to be the perfect supportive wife to the brilliant Mark Sterling. I hosted his clients, charmed his business partners, and maintained our perfect home. My own dreams were so deeply buried, I could barely remember what they were. When people asked what I did, I'd just smile and say, "Oh, I manage things for Mark." The distance between us grew slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. He was always working, always traveling. When he was home, he was distracted, always on his phone. The easy intimacy we once shared was replaced by a polite, formal distance. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped seeing me at all. I was just another piece of the perfect life he had built, a comfortable, reliable piece of furniture. Clara, of course, flourished in this new environment. She was in her element, basking in her brother's success. She was a constant presence in our lives, always dropping by, always offering her unsolicited advice, always finding a way to subtly undermine me. "You must be so bored all day in this big house," she'd say, running a finger over my dust-free mantelpiece. "Don't you wish you had, a purpose?" The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Then came the night it all fell apart. It was a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because I had made his favorite meal, beef bourguignon, which took hours to cook. I'd opened a good bottle of wine. I was hoping for a quiet evening, a chance to reconnect. He came home late, well after 9. He walked into the kitchen, dropped his briefcase on the floor, and looked at the beautifully set table with a blank expression. "What's all this?" he asked. His tone was flat, cold. "It's Tuesday," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I made your favorite." He didn't even look at the food. He just looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw a stranger, a cold, hard stranger I had never met before. "We need to talk," he said. And there it was, the 4 words that detonate a life. He told me he wasn't happy. He said he hadn't been happy for years. He said he felt trapped, that our life was a cage he had built for himself. He talked about wanting more, about wanting to feel alive again. It was a monologue full of cliches, probably rehearsed in front of a mirror. "I've met someone," he said, finally getting to the point. He said it so casually, as if he were announcing he'd switched coffee brands. I just stood there, the ladle still in my hand, the rich smell of the stew filling the air. I couldn't speak. The shock was a physical thing, a vice gripping my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. "Her name is Tiffany," he continued as if I had asked. "She's vibrant. She gets me." Of course her name was Tiffany. "So what happens now?" I finally managed to whisper. The words felt like shards of glass in my throat. This is where the man I thought I knew completely disappeared, replaced by the predator Nana Rose had always suspected was lurking beneath the surface. "I want a divorce," he said, "and I want you out of my house." My house. He said it with such ownership, such absolute certainty. "This is my home, Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "Our home." He laughed, a short, ugly, humorless sound. "Don't be naive. I paid for this house. I built this business. You contributed nothing. You haven't worked a real job in 15 years. Every word was a calculated blow. He was dismantling our entire life, our shared history, and painting me as a freeloader. The years of sacrifice, of support, of putting his dreams before my own, erased in an instant. "I want you gone by the end of the week," he said, turning to leave the room. "Pack your clothes, your personal things. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. He'll offer you a small settlement for your time. Be smart and take it. Don't try to fight me on this. You will lose." He paused at the doorway. "And just so we're clear, you're walking away with nothing. The house, the cars, the savings. It's all mine. I earned it." And then he walked out. He left me standing in the kitchen of the house that was legally mine, surrounded by the smell of a meal I had lovingly cooked for a man who no longer existed. The first 24 hours were a blur of shock and grief. I didn't sleep. I just wandered through the rooms of my beautiful home, touching the furniture, the walls, like a ghost. The life I had known had been a mirage. The man I had loved was a monster. Then, through the fog of pain, another feeling began to surface, a cold, hard knot of anger. He thought I was nothing, a decorative object he could discard when he got bored. He thought I was weak, stupid, and powerless. He had just declared war, and he had no idea, not the slightest clue, of the weapon I had in my arsenal. The next morning, I called Mr. Fields. "He kicked you out." Mr. Fields' voice was tight with controlled fury. "Out of your own home? He thinks it's his," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. The tears were gone, replaced by a strange, icy calm. He told me I would get nothing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Your grandmother was a prophet. So, what do you want to do?" The old me, the girl in the photograph, would have wanted to fix it. She would have cried and pleaded and tried to remind Mark of the love we once shared. But that girl was gone. Mark had killed her. The woman who stood in her place had a different instinct. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about survival and justice. I want to do what Nana Rose would have done, I said. I want to be strategic. Good, Mr. Fields said, a note of approval in his voice. The first rule of strategy is to never reveal your strongest position until the final move. He thinks the house is his biggest asset. He will use it as leverage. He will try to intimidate you with it. Let him. And that was the moment the plan was born. It wasn't a complicated plan. In fact, its beauty was in its simplicity. The plan was to do nothing. Well, not nothing. The plan was to let Mark believe he had already won, to let him get comfortable in his victory, to give him enough rope to hang himself, his sister, and his little 20-something girlfriend Tiffany right along with him. I told Mr. Fields to act as my legal counsel. We agreed that for now we would not mention the trust. We would let Mark's lawyer lead the negotiations. We would play the part of the downtrodden, intimidated party. The first step was the hardest. I had to leave my home. It felt like tearing off a limb. I packed 2 suitcases with my clothes, my books, and the shoebox of photos. I left everything else. I wanted him to see the empty closets, the empty shelves, and believe I had fled with my tail between my legs. I found a small, dreary 1-bedroom apartment across town, the kind with beige carpets and thin walls. It was a miserable little place, and it was perfect. It fit the narrative. Poor, abandoned wife, cast out with nothing. Mark had the locks changed the day after I left. Clara sent me a text message. Heard you moved. Hope you're finding your feet. Let me know if you need help getting a job. I hear Starbucks is hiring. The cruelty was breathtaking. But instead of crying, I took a screenshot. It was the first piece of evidence in what would become a very thick file. I started documenting everything. Every smug post Mark made on social media, posing with Tiffany in my garden. Every condescending email from his lawyer offering a pittance of a settlement. Every text from Clara, dripping with poison and fake concern. I was building a case, not just a legal case, but a moral one. I needed to remember exactly who these people were when the time came to face them. The next phase of the plan required me to swallow my pride. I had to play the victim. And I had to play it convincingly. Mark's lawyer, a shark named Mr. Albright, would call Mr. Fields with ridiculously low settlement offers. Mr. Fields would call me and we'd strategize. He's offering $10,000, Mr. Fields said one afternoon. A goodwill gesture, he calls it. $10,000 for 15 years of my life. The price of a used car. Tell him I cried, I said, my voice cold. Tell him I'm desperate, but I think I deserve at least 20. Let's see if we can get him to double the insult. We went back and forth like this for months. I never spoke to Mark directly. It was all through the lawyers. I allowed myself to be portrayed as a desperate, emotionally fragile woman on the verge of a breakdown. And they believed it. Why wouldn't they? It's what they expected of me. I had played the part of the docile, supportive wife for so long they couldn't imagine me as anything else. My compliance was a foregone conclusion. Meanwhile, Mark and Tiffany were living it up. He threw a massive party at the house, a housewarming party, as if he'd just moved in. Clara posted dozens of pictures online. Tiffany, a woman 10 years younger than me, was wearing a dress I had left in the closet. She was posing in my kitchen, laughing with my friends, or people I had thought were my friends. It was a public and deliberate humiliation. Each picture was a little knife twisting in my gut. But with each twist, the cold resolve inside me hardened. They were arrogant, and arrogance creates blind spots. While I was playing the part of the broken woman, I was also quietly working. I still had access to some of the online accounts for the business, things I had set up for Mark years ago, and he had forgotten to lock me out of. He was so sure of my incompetence, he didn't even think to change the passwords. I started digging. I knew Mark had been spending lavishly. The new sports car, the expensive watches for Tiffany, the first-class trips. I had assumed it was coming from the company's profits, but as I looked through the credit card statements and expense reports, I saw a pattern. He was blurring the lines. He was writing off personal expenses as business costs. That romantic trip to Paris with Tiffany, labeled as a European tech conference. The diamond bracelet? Client gifts. He was committing tax fraud, and he was doing it sloppy, with the confidence of a man who believed he would never be caught. I downloaded everything, every statement, every receipt, every doctored invoice. I created a meticulous, cross-referenced file and sent it all to Mr. Fields. "Oh my," was all he said when he received it. "This is more than just leverage in a divorce. This is criminal." The pieces were all falling into place. I had the house. Now I had the business. Mark's entire empire was built on a lie, and I was holding the evidence that could bring it all down. The divorce proceedings dragged on for almost a year. Mark was trying to wear me down, to starve me out. He assumed my tiny savings would run out, and I'd be forced to accept his pathetic offer. He didn't know that Mr. Fields, acting on my instructions, had arranged for the trust to provide me with a modest but steady living allowance. I wasn't desperate. I was patient. The final act of their arrogance was the cruelest. Mark's lawyer filed a motion to have me declared a vexatious litigant, arguing that my refusal to accept their generous offer was a waste of the court's time. They were trying to paint me as unhinged, greedy, and irrational. Clara, naturally, provided a sworn affidavit in support of the motion. She painted a picture of me as a jealous, bitter woman, unable to accept that Mark had moved on. She lied, under oath, about conversations we'd supposedly had, where I had threatened to ruin him. When Mr. Fields read me her affidavit, I felt a surge of pure, white-hot rage. This was no longer just about a house or money. This was about my name, my character. They weren't content to just leave me with nothing. They wanted to destroy my reputation as well. That was the moment I knew I would not show them a shred of mercy. "It's time," I told Mr. Fields. "Let's set the final hearing, and we submit our evidence. All of it." The day of the hearing arrived. It was a crisp autumn morning. I chose my outfit with care. Not a power suit, not a victim's rags. A simple, elegant gray dress. I wanted to look calm, composed, and utterly resolute. When I walked into the courtroom, the change in atmosphere was palpable. Mark and Clara were there, huddled with their lawyer, Mr. Albright. They looked supremely confident. They saw my simple dress and quiet demeanor and mistook it for surrender. Mark caught my eye and gave me a look of pure disdain. It was the last time he would ever look at me that way. The hearing began. Mr. Albright stood up and began his argument, painting me as the scorned woman, the gold digger trying to get a slice of a pie I hadn't helped bake. He was slick and theatrical. Mark and Clara watched him, nodding along, their faces smug. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and I waited. When he was finished, the judge looked at Mr. Fields. "Your response?" Mr. Fields, a man who had practiced law for 50 years, stood up slowly. He was not slick or theatrical. He was solid like an old oak tree. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and steady, "my client has no interest in a pie she did not bake. She is merely here to claim what has always been hers." And then he began. He started with the house. He submitted the deed, the original notarized document with my name, and only my name, on it. He submitted the full documentation for the irrevocable trust, highlighting the clauses that made it an untouchable personal asset, completely separate from the marital estate. He submitted the sworn testimony of the bank official who had overseen the transfer of my inheritance, confirming that 100% of the funds used to purchase the land and build the house came directly from my grandmother's estate. As he laid out the documents one by one, a ripple of confusion went through the other side of the room. I watched Mark's face. The smugness was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He leaned over and whispered frantically to his lawyer, who was staring at the documents with a growing look of horror. Mr. Albright had clearly been lied to. He had built his entire case on the assumption that the house was Mark's biggest bargaining chip, and Mr. Fields had just vaporized it. Then came the moment that brought us back to the beginning of this story. The judge, after reviewing the paperwork, made his declaration. This court finds that the property located at 125 Willow Creek Lane is, and has always been, the sole and exclusive property of the plaintiff. That was when the panic truly set in on Mark's face. He looked at me, his eyes begging for an explanation. He saw the small, cold smile on my face, and he knew. He knew he had been played, but Mr. Fields was just getting started. "Now, Your Honor," he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "let's discuss the business. My client's ex-husband claims she contributed nothing. We would argue that 15 years of unpaid labor as an administrator, bookkeeper, and hostess for client events constitutes a significant contribution. But we won't just argue it. We'll prove it." He then submitted the second file, the one I had so carefully compiled. He presented copies of the company's original incorporation documents, which I had prepared. He showed emails from the early years, where I was clearly acting as a business manager, and then he moved on to the fraud. He projected the credit card statements onto the courtroom screen. He highlighted the trip to Paris, the jewelry, the expensive dinners. Then he showed the corresponding business expense reports, where these items were disguised as legitimate costs. With every slide, a gasp went through the courtroom. Mark was shrinking in his chair, his face a ghastly shade of gray. His lawyer was frantically shuffling through his own papers, completely blindsided. Finally, Mr. Fields submitted Clara's affidavit, the one where she had perjured herself by accusing me of being a bitter, vengeful liar. He placed it next to a printout of her social media posts, where she gloated about the parties and the lavish lifestyle, effectively corroborating my claims of their misuse of funds. "Your Honor," Mr. Fields concluded, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "Mr. Sterling has not only attempted to defraud my client of her rightful share of the marital estate, he has actively committed tax fraud and suborned perjury from his own sister to do so. We are not asking for a settlement. We are demanding justice." The silence that followed was absolute. The judge looked at Mark, his eyes cold as steel. "Mr. Sterling, do you have any response to these allegations?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked broken, defeated. The arrogant man who had torn my life apart was gone. In his place was a small, terrified man who had just watched his entire world burn down around him. The final judgment was swift and brutal. The judge not only affirmed my sole ownership of the house, but ordered Mark to vacate the premises within 48 hours. He awarded me 60% of the business, based on my contributions and Mark's financial misconduct. He voided the prenuptial agreement Mark had forced me to sign, citing fraud. And most damningly, he announced he was forwarding the evidence of financial malfeasance to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. As a final, satisfying twist of the knife, he also recommended the district attorney investigate Clara for perjury. The gavel fell. It was over. I stood up, and for the first time, I felt light. The weight I had been carrying for 2 years was gone. As I walked out of the courtroom, I passed Mark. He looked up at me, his face a mess of desperation and disbelief. "How?" he whispered. "How could you do this?" I paused and looked down at the man who had so thoroughly underestimated me. "You told me not to fight you because I would lose," I said, my voice even and calm. "You were right. I didn't fight you. I simply let you destroy yourself." Then I walked out into the sunlight, leaving him to face the ruins of the life he had stolen. The aftermath was exactly as catastrophic for them as you might imagine. Mark was forced to leave my house in disgrace. The movers came 2 days later, packing up his expensive suits and Tiffany's designer dresses under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. I had the locks changed again, this time for good. The DA's investigation into Sterling Innovations was swift. My evidence was a perfect roadmap of his crimes. He was indicted on multiple counts of tax evasion and wire fraud. With the company's reputation in tatters and 60% of it now belonging to me, it was effectively insolvent. I worked with a forensic accounting team to liquidate my share, pulling out a significant sum before the whole thing collapsed into bankruptcy. Mark, facing prison time, lost everything. The business was gone. His reputation was destroyed. Tiffany, who had apparently signed on to be the girlfriend of a tech mogul, not a convicted felon, left him the moment the first indictment was handed down. I heard she was dating a hedge fund manager now. She was nothing if not consistent. Clara got her own dose of karma. The perjury investigation, combined with the public shame of her brother's downfall, made her a social pariah. The snobbish friends she had worked so hard to cultivate wanted nothing to do with the sister of a criminal. Her husband, embarrassed by the scandal, filed for divorce a few months later. The last I heard, she had to sell her oversized mansion and was living in a condo, a fate she probably considered worse than death. About a month after the hearing, Mark showed up at my door, at my house. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing a wrinkled shirt. The arrogant predator was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic shell of a man. "Please," he begged when I opened the door. "We have to talk. We can fix this. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." He tried to tell me he loved me. He tried to blame Tiffany, to blame Clara, to blame the pressures of his business. He took no responsibility. Even in his ruin, he was still the same narcissist he had always been. I listened to his rambling, pathetic excuses without saying a word. When he finally ran out of steam, his shoulders slumped in defeat, I just looked at him. "You didn't make a mistake, Mark," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You made a choice. You chose to be cruel. You chose to lie, and you chose to believe I was stupid. These are the consequences of your choices." He started to cry then. Big, ugly, gulping sobs. He reached out for me as if to touch my arm. I stepped back, out of his reach. "Goodbye, Mark." I closed the door gently in his face, turned the deadbolt, and walked away. I never saw him or spoke to him again. I heard through the grapevine that he took a plea deal and served 18 months in a low-security federal prison. After that, he just disappeared. And so I come back to today, sitting here in my sunroom with this old photograph in my hand. The house is quiet around me. It's no longer just a house. It's my sanctuary, my fortress. The walls Nana Rose gave me. I spent the first year after the divorce reclaiming the space. I painted over the sterile gray walls Mark had insisted on with warm, vibrant colors. I filled the rooms with comfortable furniture that I loved, not pieces chosen to impress clients. I tore out the perfectly manicured, boring shrubs in the garden and planted wildflowers and rambling roses. I made it mine. With the money from the liquidation of my share of the business, I started my own small firm, a historical preservation consultancy. I do what I always dreamed of doing. I help people save old buildings, uncover their stories. It's not a multi-million-dollar empire, but it's mine. It's fulfilling, and I'm good at it. I'm not alone here anymore either. About a year ago, I met someone. His name is Alex. He's a history professor at the local university. He's kind and he's quiet, and he has the most wonderful, genuine laugh. He loves the house, not because it's big or impressive, but because of the light in the sunroom and the history we're building within its walls. He knows my story. I told him all of it. He just listened, and when I was done, he took my hand and said, "I'm sorry you went through that, but I am in awe of the woman who came out the other side." He never makes me feel small. He celebrates my intelligence, my strength. He is the antithesis of Mark in every possible way. He is a partner, not a proprietor. I look at the smiling girl in the photograph one last time. I feel a wave of compassion for her innocence and her misplaced trust. But I don't pity her. She was stronger than she knew. She just needed a reason to prove it. I put the photo back in the shoebox and closed the lid. There's no need to dwell on the past anymore. The ghosts have been exorcised. My grandmother's words echo in my mind, as they often do. Never let a man be your entire financial plan. A woman needs her own walls to stand within. She was right. I have my walls, and they are strong. Inside them, I have built a life that is peaceful, successful, and filled with a quiet, joyful love. And that is a victory sweeter than any revenge. It is the victory of a life well lived, on my own terms, and it is more than enough.